this hour. Super excited to have Winifred Phillips with us. I think I can speak for everyone here in the room that we're super excited. I think we're all big fans of you, not only as a composer, we enjoy your soundtracks for tons of games that we all know and love, but also as a speaker, as an author. And I can speak from experience that I think you had a direct influence on me becoming an author back there. Yeah, there's the book. And this is kind of a surreal moment for me, just because that was when I first read your book many years ago. It was a very influential moment of, oh, wow, even I could make it. I think you have a very relatable story. And what I would love to do to kick off our time together, since our chat here today is about making the leap into the AAA game industry, I think you have a really cool story about God of War that you talk about in your book. So maybe you can just let's just jump right there. Let's cut to that story. I think that'd be a great starting point today.
Sure. Okay, let's see if I can do this. I've been working in radio for a number of years. For National Public Radio, I did a series called Radio Tales. It dramatized classic works of science fiction and fantasy and horror for the radio. So I did things like, War of the Worlds and Dracula and Time Machine, things like that. It was great fun. A lot of Edgar Allan Poe. It was a wonderful series. And we'd done about 100 episodes. So it was sort of winding up. And I was trying to think about what to do next. And of course, I'd always been a gamer, so I was really excited about the idea of moving from what I'd been doing into music for games, because it just felt like there were a lot of common threads. It's larger than life scoring, and it just really appealed to me. So started putting out feelers to see if I could make something happen. I did what pretty much everybody does. I worked with some indie teams, it was like student folks and modders. I did some scoring for a Half-Life mod and for an MMO that never was released and things like that. Just a lot of work that wasn't paying anything and that kind of thing, and just sort of trudging away. And I guess after a while, I just started to feel like, well, might as well try to see if lightning could strike. So I started trying to reach out to the bigger companies and sending emails, just real brief emails with just essentially, this is who I am. I worked with NPR, and here are some samples of my work, and I'd love to work with you. And so I reached out to a bunch of music supervisors and audio directors and things like that, very pie in the sky kind of effort. And I just happened to connect with a music supervisor at Sony Interactive Entertainment at precisely the right time. My luck was amazing. It was a lightning strike, really, because they were looking to expand the God of War music composition team right then. It was looking like there was going to be just a ton of music for that project. It was really going to need a team of composers. And I had sent a bunch of pieces that I'd done for that MMO that was never released that were choral in nature, because I like composing for choir, and I also overdubbed my own voice into a choir. So,
That's great.
So it allows me to create a bigger sound without the kind of resources you need to record choir. So, So I had those recordings and I submitted those, and the music supervisor at Sony got back to me and said, "This sounds good. Would love to meet with you. Are you going to E3?" And I said, "Yeah." And that would be great. And I didn't actually have any plans of going to E3, but after that, it was like, okay, let's get a flight. And so I went to E3 for the first time. And before going, it's like, okay, you're going to E3, you're going to be in LA. Let's see what you can do. This is the first time I've been to LA. So sending out lots of emails to lots of different teams. Can I meet with anybody else? Can I make this into something? And when I got there, I met with a few people at different teams. And one of them, of course, was the music supervisor at Sony. And he took me over to the God of War booth. And they had this figure of Kratos hanging over the top of the booth, holding a Medusa head by the snake hair, and so I got to see gameplay of, and this was essentially the coming out party, the announcement for it at that time. So I got to see Kratos fighting warriors and just, it was marvelous. Just seeing that. And I talked with that music supervisor then, and he invited me to be a part of the team. And so I do think once I got back from E3, I did have to send a few extra pieces of music to kind of seal the deal. But they were existing. He wanted to hear a little bit more, and then he contacted me and said, "Want to join the team?" And I ended up doing God of War. Oh, and also Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because that was one of the other meetings I was able to sort of hustle up for E3. I met with the High Voltage Software folks, and they were doing the movie tie-in game for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So it was going to have that Danny Elfman sound. And again, it required that sort of vocal component with that, you have that Danny Elfman vocal style, so I could bring that to it as well. And those ended up being my first 2 video game gigs, which was interesting for me too, because then I had essentially a 2-pronged career, because the 2 projects that came out first, one was an M-rated, gory, adult, dark project, and the other was a kids game that was very light and whimsical and fun and colorful. So my career from then kind of went on those 2 different forked paths. And so I keep swinging back and forth between things like the Da Vinci Code and Shrek the Third and Assassin's Creed Liberation and the Little Big Planet projects and things like that. So yeah, it was really great for me. And it was fortunate, because just the timing, the way it lined up was just amazing. So that's my story.
Wow. I had never realized that it created a fork. Because, if you trace your career, it's these 2 distinctly different styles that should never happen from the same person. But I think that there's something to the power of writing 2 very different styles of music is extremely creatively fulfilling, I imagine.
It really is. I think part of it is they require very different musical vocabulary and different tools. So when you're going back and forth, you have to build up different, like your toolbox has to be continually replenished with new tools and ideas. And I think they really do inform each other. It helps to stay fresh, because then you get to do different kinds of projects all the time and exercise your creative muscles in different directions. I mean, I'm really fortunate that I get to do that. I think some composers, when they become known for a specific thing, you kind of chafe against that a little bit, and you want a chance to do something different and sort of stretch in a new direction, sort of loosen up certain creative muscles that don't get worked as much as you'd like them to be. And I've just been really lucky that I get to swing back and forth, like do something like Speed Racer for Warner Brothers, which is techno and jazz and fusion, and it's just great fun there. And then just scoot over and do something like Spore Hero for EA, and just really world music influenced and really bizarre and very creative and funny. And so it's just made my career really interesting. I've been grateful for that.
That's fantastic. It prompts another question. I'm curious, can you walk back in time a little bit before you went to E3? Because clearly everything is a catalyst, right? From that moment. And you keep using the term luck or you're fortunate, but I think there's more to it, because when we were talking with Tom Salta yesterday, I keep referring to him, but man, he dropped a lot of wisdom. He mentioned the phrase that we've heard before, that luck is just this. Luck is when opportunity strikes and you're prepared for it. It's when luck, preparation is part of it. So how do you think that you were prepared for that moment? Because there's no one becomes an overnight success. There's probably a decade of something leading up to that. Maybe it was your time with radio, but clearly you were ready because you already had some experience. But what do you think, if you could just pinpoint a couple items that helped you be prepared?
Yeah, that actually is a really good question. I do think that my time in radio was tremendously helpful. It was boot camp. Those shows were, it was half-hour shows. There were 100 of them, and they were wall-to-wall music. It was music throughout. And it was a pretty tight schedule, so I had to keep on, churning just to get the work done. So I was constantly researching and learning as I went along. And I was fairly new to the idea of composition for media when I started. So it was a real learning curve for me from the beginning of that project, just building up tools and learning how to use them and kind of building out a studio. I got a chance to really hammer my skill set into form for that project, for that series. I'm not saying that by the time I got to God of War, it was all done. You're like, I'm good now. It wasn't really like that. It's been a learning process all the way along, and I think and I think everybody here was probably relate to this. I mean, we're always growing with each project. I mean, you look back on past projects and you always see things that you do better now than you did then. So I wouldn't say that. And I think this is something else that I think is helpful. I think a lot of young composers come into it thinking, I need to know that I'm ready for the moment. I need to know that I've got it all in place and I feel really confident in my skills and I'm ready for when it happens. And I wouldn't have said that I was ready when God of War happened. I just wanted it. And I'd been trying really hard. And so I was there. So when all the elements came together, so just like the terror of the moment of saying, I have got to rise to the occasion. And I think that's more important than thinking you've got to be totally ready. Because I think some people feel like they've got to wait before they go after it. But the act of going after it is a part of the growth process. And each project you try, even when they ask you to do demos, and even if you don't land the gig, that process also is a part of your growth. And so just getting yourself out there, I think, is tremendously important. Plus, the world of musical taste is so varied in terms of what people like and what they expect from music in a game. So you have to kind of find your people and they always talk about that on the internet. We all find our community and we find our people and we kind of bond together and it's sort of a self-affirmation, a sense of belonging just in terms of community. But I think that's also true for the kind of music you make and the kind of teams that are going to respond to that. You have to sort of find your people, the people who respond to the kind of music you're making. And so it's like speed dating. You're going to try to make connections with people who aren't responding to the kind of music you're making. And that's fine. You can't take that to heart because it doesn't work for them. Maybe they're not your peeps. And you have to keep kind of broadening your search and going after it until you find the people that understand where you're coming from creatively, because you understand them and then they understand you. So you've kind of found your community, and it can take a while to get there.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I want to throw to one of your questions. You can pick whichever one you think is more appropriate, but she had some questions about different studio sizes and working with them.
Mm.
Yeah. I guess I'll start with the sort of broader one. I'll ask both and you can go in whichever direction you feel like. So my first question is, in your experience, like, what are the differences between sort of indie, mid-size, and like AAA studios? And then the other sort of related question to it is, like, I know that depending on the size of the studio, you might work with folks in like sound design, dialogue, sound effects, and like, what's that like? Do you ever dip your toe into that as well?
Great question. I missed your name.
Chris.
Chris. Hi, Chris. It was a fantastic question. So first, the differences between the different studio sizes. It's huge. It really is huge. And also, strangely enough, sometimes it's just very malleable, just depending upon the workplace culture, the culture of the studio that you're going to work with. There are some large studios that still have kind of a fly by the seat of your pants feeling, and so it's not as regimented and structured. And they bear more in common with the small studios, which are more likely to be very seat of your pants feeling, where there might not even be an audio team or any audio folks, and they're just coming to you as the first step to think about the sound of their game. So you get to contribute in a very beginning of the stage feeling where you're able to have that sort of creative conversation with the team and be able to contribute there. Whereas with the larger team, sometimes they're really well thought out. I mean, these folks have done this for a very long time, so they know what the requirements are going to be, and they may already have the style pretty much hammered out, what they would like the music to sound like. They might have asset lists all prepared for you, and design documents that are going to really give you a sense of what to do. They might have a list of reference tracks that they've looked at. This is something that you encounter more as you swing towards the AAA well-established studios. Although, again, you might find some of the new studios doing this too, particularly if it's a new studio, like a small studio, but populated by folks who came from larger ones. So they're accustomed to that workflow. So you might see that happening. And I think the biggest takeaway for me has been just to be prepared to work in any and all ways that the team needs you to work in, whether they are leaning on you to be their guru of audio and wanted to like tap you and your knowledge to figure out what music should do for their project, or whether they are very clear about what they want music to be and do, and they want you to fit into their workflow like a puzzle piece. And you kind of have to feel your way then and feel how does that flow feel to you, and how can you make them the most comfortable? It's really about kind of analyzing the psychology of it and making sure that the people on the other end of the conversation are feeling really at ease with you. That for me, that's been the most important takeaway to it. You get into those initial conversations and it's all about being really sensitive to the signals you're getting about how they see you. Like, what kind of a contributor do they think you're going to be? And then just sort of respond to that in a way that's very complimentary, whatever they really need from you. I mean, we're here to be a tool in their toolbox, and we want to be the best Swiss Army knife we can be for them. So we just look to see what they need from us, and then we kind of adapt. That's been the best takeaway I've had for that. And I'm going to admit I forgot the other half of the question. So if you could help me with that.
Yeah. So the other half of it was, I know it varies depending on the size of the studio, like how much you work with folks in more of the sound design aspect. So yeah, what's that like? And do you ever dip your toe into sound design as well?
Yeah, well, that's actually really cool. When I worked for National Public Radio on that series, Radio Tales, I did a lot of sound design work. I was pretty much the audio person on that series. So I got the chance to do all that kind of work. But that hasn't carried over into my work as a composer in games. Most of the time, the teams I've worked with have had audio folks who are going to be responsible for the sound design element, or they're going to get audio folks for that part of it. Now, there have been a few times in which I have integrated sound design elements into my music. And that's kind of another conversation altogether and really interesting and fun to do. Like for Speed Racer, I integrated a lot of sounds of the arena and of the cars into the musical score I was creating for that game. Just to kind of amp up the excitement of the crowd and to make the music and the like Doppler effects and engine sounds work together better. Because the one thing we can do as composers with sound design is we can introduce elements that are guaranteed to lock with the music we're creating because they're baked in together. And that's not a guarantee in terms of how sound design and music will interrelate when they're implemented into the game. You don't know if the moments are going to converge the way you'd want them to, particularly if a sound design element would be a really great punctuation for something that's happening in the music. So, like for instance, in Speed Racer for the Thunderhead track, I have a lot of special cheering and clapping and stamping going on in the music that kind of accentuates the idea that there is an audience watching what you're doing, because that's understood, but you don't really see it. And you want to kind of get a sense of the excitement of that crowd while you're racing, because it's an important part of the kind of play experience you're trying to have. So that kind of thing I've done. Like for the mall with Twisted Pixel games, when I was scoring for that creature. There, it stars a little purple one-eyed alien with a huge mouth, and it kind of creeps around like a snail. So it's essentially a walking mouth. And so I integrated a lot of very squishy and mouth-oriented sounds into the music, like mouthwash swishing and kind of muddy, slurpy sounds, and pepper grinders for like grinding teeth, and styrofoam, chair squeaks, anything that seemed kind of gurgly and blurpy, and things that would feel appropriate to this purple alien. And then that became rhythmic so that I could use it musically. So it's kind of sound design, but it's really a musical component. And when you can do that, and when it makes sense to do that, then you've bound your music and your sound design together with the game. I feel like it can make the music feel closer to the whole oral experience you're creating. And so that's really intriguing for me. I enjoy doing that.
That's such a fun approach. I love that. I want to throw it to John Henry. He has a couple questions, very connected to this as well, about working in the AAA game space. So go for it, John Henry. I think he's audio only.
Yeah. Hi, Winifred. Thanks for being here.
Hi, John Henry.
Apologies for the camera. I'm going to focus on a perspective of getting into the space. I'm from South Africa, which is quite a distance away from the US. And from a remote position, what approach would be best in connecting and having a conversation with those in the AAA game space? I've had a lot of success via cold emailing for mid-core and indie developers, but most of the AAA game companies don't have emails because of the expectation of a lot of submissions. How would I get the attention of getting into a conversation with somebody like that?
That's a good question. And it has changed over the years. When I first reached out to Sony about God of War, there was more accessibility, honestly, in terms of being able to reach out and make a connection with those folks. And I will acknowledge that it is a little bit harder to do, but it's not impossible, particularly if you can make yourself visible. I think that's something that's important to be able to do, just to promote your own career, to make yourself visible in the industry. Attending conferences is something that's very helpful, and also becoming parts of organizations like Audio Gang, like the Game Audio Network Guild, that things like that, where there is a community that you can establish yourself in, that can be helpful. And then apart from that, it's just kind of hanging tough. One of the things I've personally noticed is my future gigs can sometimes rest on relationships that I've developed with people as they move from company to company. We live and work in an industry with a lot of turnover. So people working in one company might drift to another, and you might suddenly find yourself speaking with someone who is with an indie company when you first worked with them, but is now at a AAA company. And that might become an open door for you to be considered for more AAA work. So that can be helpful, the relationships that you can build up there. But needless to say, that can be hard when you're first starting. Developing these sorts of relationships can be difficult. So trying to go to these sorts of events and just meet people, hopefully be introduced to people, and also, if you can, try to reach out to contacts if it is possible, just to let them know that you're there. It can be difficult to find those sorts of connections, but there are some AAA folks who are available through social media, who make themselves available. And depending, everyone's different, and some people are more insular than others. And so you have to feel your way and see what the comfort level is. But sometimes you can make a cordial kind of friendship connection with some people at larger studios through social media. You just have to be careful that you're not hitting them up for work right away. You don't want to make people feel put upon in that sense in an environment where they wouldn't be expecting that. So you mostly just want to create a human connection and a sense of awareness of each other. You know me, I know you. And then later on, particularly if there is a project that has just been announced or something that you might be really enthusiastic about, might know something about, that's when reaching out and saying, hey, I just heard you're involved in this particular project and I can't tell you how excited I am about it. I would love to be thought of for it if that's at all possible. Now that can happen. Again, you have to be really careful and sensitive to kind of the personal space of the person you're talking to. You don't want to hit somebody up like that if it feels like that's not what they're looking for. And so there's a certain amount of psychology involved in just trying to understand where people are coming from and to come from a good place so that you make people feel good. Just keeping that in the center of your mind with everything that you do as you're pursuing your career can be really helpful, because then you don't make people feel uncomfortable, and that's the worst thing you can do. Everybody's looking for a relationship that's going to feel good, where they like a friendship or where a relationship of trust where, I mean, they like you or they feel comfortable around you or they feel like they can trust you. And that can be nurtured if you're always thinking about the comfort of the person you're with. So if keeping that in the center of your mind, I think, is a great way to guide your steps when you're doing this sort of thing. It can feel very uncertain, but if you're always keeping in mind how the other person might feel about what you're doing, then that can help you to move in the right direction.
To use the metaphor that you used earlier, Winifred, about speed dating, this sounds to me like the exact opposite, where a cold email comes across like if you're just reaching out to some decision maker in a company with no prior relationship and asking for work. I mean, who's going to honor that? There's no relationship. It's like trying to speed date, essentially, versus taking the time to go have the nice dinner and all the things, right? You're not trying to force anything. You're trying to develop a friendship and a relationship over time. Yeah. That way, when the opportunity comes, right?
Absolutely. I don't want to necessarily say that essentially the cold call, right, that is anathema and must never happen. I mean, right, who am I to talk? That's what I did to start out. Sure. So I'm not going to tell people don't do that, particularly if you know there's a project that's been announced or that's early enough that where the music wouldn't have been selected and it's something you're really passionate about. Maybe you even have music samples from projects you've done in the past that would be really appropriate to be considered for it, and you feel like you're an excellent choice for it. I wouldn't say in that circumstance, oh, never contact them. That's the worst thing you can do. And it's a risk. This is always a risk. It's always scary. And there are times in which you might do something like that and get a response of someone saying, wow, your timing was excellent. We really needed to talk to somebody. Love to put you in consideration with this pool of people that we're looking at. That's great. And then you might have another circumstance in which someone might come back to you and say, we don't deal with composers directly, and then point you towards a human resources person, which isn't really going to get you anywhere. But that tells you something too, that for this area, this direction, that approach won't work. And I think as long as you are really polite and respectful and observe what people want, that you're not going to do yourself any harm. As long as you're not, mass emailing and constantly following up and things like that, as long as you're being very respectful and sensitive to the way in which people react to you, then I think it's still a possibility to do that. Although it also kind of takes an iron will because it's hard. it's a hard thing to do. It's you're really putting yourself out there, and you can feel very vulnerable. And it's also a situation in which you either feel like you did the smartest thing in the world or you did the dumbest thing in the world, and really it feels like that. So it's hard to just keep on rolling doing that. But it can work. Just admittedly, it is a difficult road to go down.
I'd love to toss to Jake. Jake had a couple questions. Again, we have a lot of good questions today. Jake, you choose which one you want to share here. You had one about technology and then one about like career development. So you go for it, whichever.
Cool. Yeah, I'll ask the technology one. Hi, Winifred. You've been saying
hi, Jake.
Hi. So I'm really curious to know what your setup is at your studio, like your computer specs and everything, because I find myself always upgrading, throughout the process of time, and I'm just really curious what those who have worked on AAA games, what their setups look like, all the ins and outs of it.
Oh, sure. Well, I actually, and this is an interesting situation to look at it. I've been doing this for a long time, starting at National Public Radio and working my studio up. So I think my studio might be a little bit eccentric in comparison to the way other people work. I have a multi-computer setup. I'm looking at, I think I have 3 PCs and 3 Macs. No, wait, 4 PCs because one is dedicated solely to DSP. So,
Wow.
so I have one that I have a Mac. The newest Mac is running Pro Tools, and then I've got a couple of other Macs that are running Contact. Contact is what I've been using for pretty much all of my sampling, and so and then I have the 2 PCs that are also running Contact. It's nice to be platform agnostic in that way, because then you can avail yourself of virtual instruments that are platform specific in terms of some that only work on Windows, some that only work on Mac. And so you can do that. And then I have everything hooked up together with a local area network. And so that's how I've been operating. And I think it might have stemmed from that was really the best way to get the most horsepower out of your system if you were going to be trying to do orchestral simulation, which is really demanding of your system. And it's something I've done a lot. So I really needed the RAM, and I needed the horsepower. I needed to be able to get that kind of work done. So I went a multi-computer route. And so that's essentially the way in which my studio is set up. In terms of the sounds I use, I pretty much use everything. I'm very much a mix and match person. I like to take bits and pieces from all sorts of different libraries and combine them together and see what sounds I can create that feel unique and personal to me. And I think that's something that is good for every composer who's sort of growing their studio. I mean, essentially, our sound library is kind of like our fingerprint as a media composer in the modern technological age. As we grow our sound library, it reflects what we're interested in sonically, and then it becomes a very unique part of what our sound is. So I always sort of hesitate when people ask me what virtual libraries do I use, because I wouldn't want somebody to not go through the process of exploring it themselves and finding what, essentially tastes good to them, if that makes sense, because that's going to be intrinsically connected to your musical taste, and it's going to work better with the way in which you create. So, and I found that's been true for me as I've built up sounds and expanded my sound palette over the years, that it really reflects the way in which I create music and the kind of things that excite me and interest me.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's quite the setup. I love hearing that. Let's throw to Paul. Because Paul had a question, another technological question about, he has something to say about one of your GDC interviews. So let's go from there.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Hi. First of all,
Hi, Paul.
the background. I love the background. And I've been listening to a lot of your music without actually knowing. In all the Spotify playlists, there's so much of your music in there. I just found out. So about like the GDC interview, you said that your goal and the goal of game music in general is to work in the moment and be reactive so that every player has a feeling like the music was composed specifically for them. Therefore, you construct it in like components that can be assembled and disassembled however it is needed in the music. With how many layers approximately do you end up in the end, and why, and what's like the thought process behind how many layers you have?
Great question. Awesome. This is going to be fun. Okay. Well, each team you deal with is going to have different ambitions about how many layers, and it's really a fluid thing. And it can be like, just as an example, in terms of vertical layering, which is a type of interactive music implementation in which the music is split into continuous audio files that are played simultaneously on top of each other, and you can turn them up and down and mix and match, essentially mix the feel of the music on the fly. So in terms of that, on the smaller end of the spectrum, when I did the MAW, there were 3 vertical layers. And so the 3 layers essentially acted as small ensembles that could exist by themselves or could be put together. Like there would be a layer that would have essentially the jazz band trio in it. And then there'd be a layer that would be full of kind of bizarre sounds and quirky sound effects and more rhythm. And then there'd be a layer that'd be full of vocal and things like that. And then so you could pull it all together or take it all apart, and you'd have very different musical flavors. And that could be triggered depending upon where the player was and what they were doing. And with the MAW, I was actually able to work with the team to make decisions about where the individual layers would be triggered and what the sonic relationships would be, how it would be mixed. And that was tremendous fun. I enjoyed doing that. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, for the Little Big Planet franchise, they dealt with 6 vertical layers for their system. So you had 6 independent wave files playing simultaneously for every composition. And one of the rules there with the Little Big Planet music design is that each layer needs to be able to exist independently. So if you play just one, it'll still work. It'll still feel like a composition. Which makes it extremely challenging to make everything fit together, because it's going to feel tremendously overwritten if you don't do it very, very carefully. So for that, I was doing things like thinking about carving out equalization spaces where certain things would exist and so that they could be played together and it wouldn't turn into mud. And I did a lot of essentially call and answer counterpoint style, where you would have half of a melody in one layer and half in the other, and they would sort of complement each other. So if they were played together, they were essentially conversing, but if they were played separately, they felt still like a melody. That sort of composition technique and a lot of that sort of thing, some flourish and sort of fragmentation of like ornamentation that could exist in a single stem and would feel good and give you a sense of foreground content, but also would fit in well with everything else when it was played together. That kind of thing. I experimented a lot with that, and to make that 6-layer system work. But just as an example, you're looking at an identical system, but from opposite ends of the spectrum. And you could go even smaller. You could have a vertical layering system with only 2 layers. And I think I have worked with that as well in other projects. And I suppose you could go bigger and have a vertical layering system with more than 6 layers, although I have not been asked to do that. So I don't know what that would be like. But it really depends on the ambition of the team. Likewise with horizontal resequencing, when you're composing music in chunks and then the game engine is disassembling and reassembling on the fly, you could have a system that had just like where a piece of music would have like 3 or 4 chunks in it. Or you could have one where every measure was an individual chunk that could be reordered and juggled around like a clown juggling a million balls. You know, it could happen like that. It really depends on the ambition of the team. So we have to kind of be ready. and not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Just to kind of jump in there and adapt our composition style to the ambition of the team, to what they're thinking about. It appeals to the creative part of us that likes puzzles, if that makes sense. If we can think of music composition as part creative expression and part puzzle solving, this sort of work leans towards the puzzle solving side of the equation. And if we can just sort of embrace that and look at it as a challenge to ourselves creatively with each different system that we're presented with, then we'll be okay. You know, as long as you just kind of take the deep breath and say, okay, I can do this too. And then just take it a step at a time.
Such a cool answer. Thank you so much. I've been smiling the whole time. So maybe just a little bit of a follow-up. So usually when it comes to like the vertical one, usually it's like everything can usually exist on their own. So there's not like one percussion layer that's just there to add intensity, but even a percussion layer, for example, would have something in there to exist on its own.
Well, has been my experience with, especially with the Little Big Planet franchise, because that was essentially the remit that we were given, the design of it. And part of that was because of the play, create, share philosophy of the Little Big Planet games as a whole. The music was going to be given as stems to the player community, and they would be able to implement that in their own levels that they were creating using the creation tools. So the music needed to be able to work well with that. And we wouldn't be able to predict what the player community would do. So you really wanted all the stems to be able to work by themselves anyway. But with other projects I have worked on, there have been situations in which it wasn't really an additive situation where everything can be added to everything else, but more interchange, where you might have a couple of layers that can't exist together, but would replace each other. Depending upon what's going on. That can also happen. And it can be a nice thing to be able to do, particularly if there is a sharp contrast in terms of what's going on in the game mechanics, and you want to make a real point of that by changing the music in a sort of fundamental way. A way with two layers that really could not exist together and also accomplish that. So you might find yourself being asked to do something like that, where you have two layers that couldn't exist at the same time, and they essentially transform the piece into something different, depending upon which one is active at any given time. And that's an interesting challenge, too. It makes you look at the piece of music and think about the variation and the possibility of transforming it based on the addition of new elements.
That answered all of your wild questions, Paul. I mean,
pretty much. I would have more, but let's give it up to other people. Thank you so much again.
I have a follow-up for you, Winifred. When I hear you talk about layers, I see how passionate you are about it, that you have such a real understanding of the player experience of the different game states. And that's so fascinating to me. How do you organize this before a project starts? Or maybe it's just all complete chaos. I don't know. But what is your process for, I'm just imagining Little Big Planet, for example, 6 layers, and you have to always make sure they're always working for dozens of tracks on this soundtrack. How do you plan this so it doesn't just fall apart in the middle?
Yeah,
I'm recording live instruments and, blowing who knows how much on orchestras, and there's such a large pressure here. So what's the secret sauce here in prep?
I'm glad you gave me a specific example. With the Little Big Planet project, I actually, when I was trying to plan it out and get a sense of how to approach it, and particularly at the beginning when I was working on the first track I did in this system, which was the Victoria's Lab track, I created a visual graph of the 6 layers where I would write in what instruments might exist in each layer, and so that I could I'd look at it, I'd have it there, and I'd look at it to kind of get a sense of, okay, this layer has sort of a deeper tone to it. It exists more at the bottom end of the spectrum, and this layer has more mid-tone brilliance to it, and it's going to have its own space in the overall sonic field so that they don't clash with each other. Having a visual representation of that for Little Big Planet helped me a lot. So I made these graphs and I looked at them and I thought about it and revised it and definitely made it in pencil and that kind of thing. So with Little Big Planet, that was the way in which I worked on that. And I think but when you're talking about a highly interactive music system, most of the time, if it's ambitious, the team you're working with has already given some thought about how they're going to implement it. So you're going to get a design document that's going to have a lot of thought in it about what to do with the music, how to make it all work. And sometimes they've already tried with temp music, and perhaps there's some pre-existing material that they've just whipped up and tried in the system to get a sense if the system's going to work. And as composers, we're always grateful for that, because the last thing you want to do is be creating a ton of music for a system that is eventually going to be proven to not work. Yeah. So it's a good thing if you're talking about a really ambitious music system that the team you're getting a sense from the team that they've already given it some thought and tried and experimented a bit with it to be sure that it's going to work before you start creating a lot of content for it. On the other hand, sometimes we are asked to create some iterative music for when a system like that is first being created, which is fine. I mean, as long as they're not asking you to create a ton of music and they aren't sure that it's going to work, that's fine. You can be a part of the actual conception of the system then, and that can be really interesting. So if that is the way the team wants to work it, and I found personally in my experience that when you're starting to talk about indie studios or lower mid-tier studios where they might not have the same kind of resources or time available, that the ambition of the interactive music system doesn't tend to be sky high. They're looking at it very practically. What can we accomplish with the resources we have? And certainly that makes a lot of sense. But on occasion, you will find a new team or a really ambitious group of folks who are saying, we're going to shoot for the moon here. Yeah. And so those circumstances could actually be ones in which you are personally called upon to contribute to the design of the music itself and how it might possibly work. So that's actually really interesting. You get to feel more like you're an intrinsic part of the team then. So that's always fun.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I know that in our live chat, everyone's talking about the layer side of things. That's clearly something you're passionate about, and it shows. I want to ask our final question just to stay on time. If there's one piece of advice you would give new composers who are, let's face it, most of us are dealing with indie projects. We don't have those AAA projects, at least not yet. What is one piece of advice you would say to help make the leap, to help make that transition in coming years?
Yeah, I think, and not having a crystal ball, I'm not actually quite sure what's going to happen with the game industry. This has been I think, a volatile time in the game development community. It feels like there's a lot of change going on. On the one hand, we just came out of this surge of enthusiasm around virtual reality, which was a lot of fun. Right. And it definitely revolutionized the way game audio is considered in terms of ambisonics and binaural sound and all of that entails, and the kind of ambition that it has engendered in sound design folks, which has really been quite refreshing, I think, for everybody involved. But it has pushed game development at least the audio side, in a different direction, which I think is refreshing and good for us all. But right now, I feel like just financially and in terms of the industry wellness factor, we don't know where we're pointed right now. So I think everybody's being a little bit cautious about going into big projects. And I think AAA development may not be a great place to be kind of shooting towards if you are newer to the industry right now. I think everybody's a little bit more concerned about not taking the same kind of risks that people might have taken previously. And also, it's just such a difficult thing to do when you're starting out to try to make that lightning strike. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to give the advice about how to take the course I took. So, but I think in terms of just trying to improve your lot and advance your career, I think the best thing that we can do from each project is just try to create our very best work and then talk about it as much as we can. We're not only creators as game composers, we can also evangelize our work and use it not only as a tool for our own growth, but for the growth of other people as well. So writing blogs and getting on community bulletin boards and talking about what you do in the game audio community is a great way to build awareness of your presence in the game audio community, and also to improve all our lots, essentially, which, a lifting tide lifts all boats, as they say. So I think it is helpful in terms of continuing to advance your career and increasing the odds of landing those mid-tier gigs when you are more present, more visible, and you're reaching out and making those relationships happen and networking and meeting people. I think that's the best way to go about it. And just to be aware of the idea that a game audio career is a long one. And I don't think even as I talk about how I had that lightning strike early in my career has gone through stages, and it has grown in an uneven way in terms of the kinds of projects that I've gotten. So I've needed to remind myself that it's a long career and you need to just keep going at it. So I think that's something that younger composers could use hearing, that when you see somebody like me who's talking about how to be successful, that we're also on the same road and we're growing our own careers in the ways that we know how, and going through a lot of the same things that you guys are in terms of reaching out, meeting people, and making people aware of what we do, and trying to grow as artists. So it's a common thread for all of us.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that is extremely valuable. So thank you, Winifred. We appreciate you. If we can get some clap emojis for Winifred, and I highly recommend anyone who has not read her book. You got it?
A Composer's Guide to Game Music.
There it is.
There it is. And thank you, everybody. This was fun.
Absolutely. So everyone go check that out. It's an incredible read. Can't recommend it enough. It was a big stepping stone for me in my career of kind of solidifying some practical steps of how to get the wheels turning. So we appreciate you. We thank you. And we look forward to chatting again soon.
Thanks so much, Stephen. This was fun.